Okay, so welcome to our Radix first part series of 4 from the Radix Association in Australia on today's webinar on pulsation. And really glad that you were able to make it. And for those who have registered but unable to make it, then the session is being recorded. Okay, so let's run you through some of the practicalities of today. In order to participate, there's a chat box for you to chat with each other, but there's a designated question and section to the right, depending on the device you're using. I'll be taking the questions not from the chat with each other, but more so from the questions section. So it will be possibly underneath your poll questions, which are there for you to also answer. So have a look, have a little fiddle around. Hopefully you won't be able to interfere too much with the rest of the recording. There is some allocation for hearing impaired persons as well that you can use, but any difficulties that you're having, please put them in the question section and our assistants will be able to let us know if you need any further help. So tonight's agenda for this webinar will be starting with our welcome on the next slide. We're going to introduce you. Our keynote speaker, Narelle, will present on pulsation. We have panel guests, George Gentilis from Melbourne and Brendan Turner, with a question time and then the follow-up for the second webinar of the 4-part series. So hopefully you will have most of your answers met tonight. And we're very honoured to have this webinar co-hosted and helped through by our assistant Peter and Gypsy in the background. So whether you're a practitioner, a student, or simply curious about the connection between body and mind, you're in the right place tonight. The topic for this particular session on pulsation will explore how Radix work can deepen self-awareness, release stored tension, support emotional well-being through embodied experience. Our session is going to include expert insights, practical applications, and space for your questions. I think we need to mute some of the background noise. I'll just see how we go with that. Okay, a quick note before we begin. It'll last 90 minutes approximately. Totally encourage your active participation. So please feel free to ask your thoughts, your questions in our Q&A, chat with each other. We'll address them throughout at the discussion time that's designated at the end. Okay. Radix, or the life force as we know it, focuses on the deep connection between our emotions, thoughts, and physical experiences. By working with movement, breath, and body awareness, this approach helps us to release old patterns, heal trauma, and cultivate a more authentic and embodied way of living. So let's take a deep breath all together and begin. We're thrilled to have Narelle McKenzie, our seasoned expert in Radix Somatic Psychotherapy practicing in the Wiradjuri country, here to guide us through its core principles and practical applications. Narelle will present with a specific focus on the core concept of pulsation. Narelle's the Director and Senior Trainer of the Australian Radix Training Centre and of the Radix Institute in North America. Narelle completed her training with the Radix Institute in 1982 and has an established private psychology and psychotherapy practice in Melbourne. After completing her trainer training, she co-founded the Australian Radix Training Centre. Narelle is a registered psychologist with 42 years' experience working in private practice with adults, families, couples, and groups. She has a master's in developmental psychology and extensive experience and training in psychotherapy and psychology. As part of her private consultancy, Narelle has led experiential and training workshops on embodied psychotherapy throughout Australia, the United States, and England. She is a member of the Australian Association of Psychologists Incorporated, AAPI, a clinical member and approved supervisor on the Psychotherapy and Counselling Association, PACFA, a member of the United States Association of Body Psychotherapists, and a member of the peer review committee of the International Body Psychotherapy Journal. On our panel tonight, we're equally thrilled to bring you our two panellists, George Gentilis and Brendan Turner. George works as a somatic body subconscious-based psychotherapist with a deep and strong expertise in helping clients release and heal complex trauma. George has been in private practice since 1991. When working with George, there is less talking and more time focused on your internal body with deep somatic mindfulness work. George helps to embody more of the spirit into the body. He helps to free the blocks to your aliveness, feelings, vitality, confidence, joy, love, and the development of peace of mind. George helps clients to release chronic pain and anxiety, move and feel their body into greater health and well-being. Brendan Turner is a psychologist and Radix somatic psychotherapist with over 10 years' experience working with adults, adolescents, families, couples, and groups. Brendan works in private practice in Brisbane. Brendan specialises in post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma. Brendan's a member of the Australian Radix Body-Centred Psychotherapy Association, and he's passionate about Radix psychotherapy due to the profound and powerful transformation and healing his clients experience through working with the body. So with the panel and our keynote speaker, please get ready for an enlightened session that may change how you think about healing and self-discovery. There are poll questions to help both the keynote and the panelists have an idea of how much or how little information you may have come across regarding somatic psychotherapy or Radix work specifically. So please take a look at them and have your say with regards to general awareness, your experience and practice, and whether you would like further areas explored in this arena. So with all excitement, I'm going to hand you over to Narelle to start her presentation.
You're muted, Narelle. You'll just need to unmute. Just try now, Narelle. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah, now I can. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
There I go. Thanks very much. Okay. So good evening and welcome to this webinar on vitality and aliveness. When we were discussing titles for this presentation, I thought of vitality and aliveness as quite a good way of thinking about what is the result of working with Pulsation. But Now I think a better one might have been restoring the natural rhythms of connection. And hopefully as this webinar progresses, you'll understand why. My intention tonight is to try and present in a very short time, the basic theory of pulsation and how we think about it and how we work with it in Radix. I'll be talking a bit about theory. I might ask you to do a few things yourselves to experience some of what I'm talking about. And I'm going to end with a short case study. And then we'll be handing it over to Brendan and George, and they can elaborate further. So what do we mean when we talk about pulsation? Pulsation is a term referring to the unconscious natural rhythms in all living systems, including our bodies. They're rhythms that are occurring every day at different frequencies. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see, oops, not that one, the one back. It doesn't want to stay there.
I'm going to let you control them, Narelle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. You'll see that here are some autonomic nervous system pulsations. We can go to fight, we can go to flight, we can go to freeze, we can go to collapse. We can exert our energy, we can rest, we can sleep, we can wake. The digestive tract peristalsis would be an example of a pulsation. Moving between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system is a pulsation. Our heartbeat is a pulsation. The blood flows in and the blood flows out. And obviously our breath is very much a pulsation, being able to breathe in and able to breathe out. And the breath actually is a pulsation that we work with quite a lot in Radix work. Not so much as to teach you any specific technique of breathing, but rather to help you observe how you do work with that breath pulsation. We're all aware of how these body and physical pulsations are essential for our physical health. For example, if you don't get enough sleep, being awake is often quite tiresome. If your heartbeat is not moving in an easy pulsation, it can create severe heart problems for you. But more recently, neuroscience has confirmed what we've known for some time, that these pulsation processes in our body are also essential for our mental and emotional health. In fact, staying in one condition, one aspect of this, like sleeping all the time and not waking much, etc., has been shown to be quite unhealthy for us and can create more chronic problems. These pulsations are different for every individual as we navigate life and adjust to our social, cultural, and interpersonal situations. And we gain and lose these pulsations moment by moment, day by day, week by week. And that's a natural and often unconscious part of our life. But sometimes these pulsations are interrupted momentarily, and sometimes they can become quite chronic. Now, a major characteristic of all pulsations, whether it be the sea, our heartbeat, an amoeba, is that there's a charging or what we call a drawing in stroke, and there's an expansive or expressive stroke. Think of the tide of the sea. You know, if you watch the sea, the sea pulls out from the sand of the beach and then rushes forward again with waves or just with the motion of the tide. And this same natural withdrawal or pulling in and then an expression of our energy occurs with our bodies. And it's this pulsation process and the different manifestations of it that Radix body-centered psychotherapy focuses on and is curious about. So let's understand this in more detail. What is it that pulsates in our bodies? Radix has its roots in Reichian theory. Dr. Charles Kelly, the founder of Radix, was a student of Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Freud. And Reich, in his studies, focused on not only what people were discussing or talking about when they went to therapy, but what was happening non-verbally in their bodies. And from this work, he proposed that clients find ways to block or interrupt the energy or radix in their bodies, which interferes with their capacity to fully experience and express their aliveness and their capabilities. And he proposed that this life force in our bodies flows or pulsates in two directions. It flows from the core or vegetative processes internally in our body out to the peripheral skin and muscles of our body. And it also flows from our feet up to our head and back down to our feet. Part of this he proposed was that this flowing of this life force, whether it be from the core to the periphery or from the feet to the head, underpins all our thoughts, emotions, and actions. And it can be interrupted in all of those directions. He also proposed that there were independently 7 distinct segments of the body. Well, he proposed that there were 7 segments in the body that independently functioned from each other. And in the sense that each can express a different experience. So that's Charles Kelly saying the radix pulsates from periphery to the core and many different. So the 7 segments he proposed was the ocular, the oral, the cervical, the thoracic, the diaphragmatic, the abdominal, and the pelvic. And he proposed that it was possible to have an experience or an expression in, say, your ocular segment that could be quite independent from the sort of experience that you might have in your thoracic segment. So a fun way to do this right now would be, imagine that in this segment, this ocular segment, you're feeling frightened. And we'll exaggerate this, so your eyes are going to open really widely. And in this section, you're feeling quite angry. And when you're feeling angry, often your chest comes up. So this is being angry, this is being frightened, and who knows what's happening here. Maybe this is feeling a bit sad. And that's sort of exaggerating it, but we observe this happening when we're working with clients. And what this does is it means that often people feel really confused, and there's good reason for why they're feeling confused, because the different segments of their body are actually experiencing or expressing a different experience or expression. And so in a goal, if you like, of Radix work that isn't often achieved in one session, but may be achieved over time, is to assist clients to be congruent throughout these segments with whatever it is they are experiencing or whatever it is they are expressing. And that will enable the pulsation, obviously, to flow more freely through their body. Most importantly, the thing he also pointed out, of course, was that these processes are totally unconscious. They are habits that we've developed and that we're not consciously aware of, even though they may create chronic problems for us, or they may create a lack of flexibility in our thinking or our actions or our experiences. And definitely they impact our sense of aliveness and vitality. So in developing Radix work, Charles Kelly adopted these principles, the difference being that he called this life force the Radix. He wanted a term that was neutral of any spiritual or mechanistic energetic sort of connotations. And the word radix itself means root or source. And like Reich, we think of the radix as the life force energy that underpins thinking, behavior, and emotions. And if it gets blocked, then our thinking gets interfered with. We can't think so clearly, or we can't enact our fantasies and creative thoughts and put them into action. or we notice that there are certain feelings that we just have difficulty noticing and experiencing, let alone expressing. Or we just don't notice impulses in our body that we want to do something like reach out and connect to someone. So when a client comes to us with common issues that people come to therapy with, might be anxiety, it might be depression, it might be relationship issues, it could be eating issues, it may be trauma. As Radix practitioners, we wonder what's happening with their pulsation process. How and where is this process being interrupted from flowing freely? Or to put it another way, what's happening with their natural rhythm of connection, either with themselves or with their relationship with the world, or objects in the world, or people in the world? Radix is not a treatment model. We don't do to you. We don't consider you're broken. We don't consider you need fixing. Rather, the Radix practitioner is taught to observe and work with just the subtle processes of pulsation, and to assist, more importantly, clients to bring their awareness of how they're interrupting these processes. So we don't think of ourselves as experts telling you what to do or what you should be experiencing. It's very much a collaborative process. We do have some ideas, obviously, of what and how these interruptions may be occurring, and we may make some suggestions about different ways to move or use sound or physical contact or verbal work to bring about this awareness, but the focus is really on the client. What is their experience? And how does doing different movements with their body, or making different sounds, or engaging in different ways of physical contact affect them? And what we find is that with one client, something might be very effective. The same intervention, if you like, with another client may be totally ineffective. And in fact, this is what I find interesting about the work. As Louise indicated earlier, I've been doing this work now for a long time, over 40 years. And still, when I go into a session, I have no idea what's going to happen in that session, how someone's going to respond to some suggestions or interventions or explorations that we do, and definitely no idea of what the outcome of that will be. It keeps the work interesting. So how do we do this? Well, working with our clients, a general observation we make initially, based on what the client is sharing with us verbally and on what we are observing, is what is their pulsation pattern? And one way you do this is we think about it very generally. Is there more emphasis on this pulling in, connecting with self, building up sort of energy and charge in their body? Or is there more emphasis in what they're talking about being on the expressive side of things? As mentioned earlier, when something pulsates, it has this inward and outward movement. And on the in-stroke, there is a gathering in of the radix to the center of the core. And on the outstroke, there's a movement out to the periphery or out to the world. So we relate the taking in the in-stroke to a sense of self-contact, self-awareness, and the moving out to contact with the other. If we're going to relate to full aliveness in the world, we need both of those strokes. But what happens, obviously, as we grow up is that different things are encouraged in our families, in the social settings that we live in the cultural settings that we live in. And you'll find that in different families, in different cultures, in different societies, sometimes there's more of an emphasis or value on one stroke than the other. I think in Western societies, there's a lot more emphasis often, or not so much emphasis, but value of the outstroke, and to the neglect of the importance and significance of the in-stroke. So some of us block our vitality by blocking what we call the in-stroke. the capacity to be aware of what we're experiencing and thinking and wanting to do, and letting that impulse sort of deepen down through those segments of the body. Others of us have a more tendency to block the outstroke, the expression of who we are in the world. And some of us keep our pulsations so regular that we survive, sort of, and we achieve, but we don't do it with any joy or any connection. Of course, all of us do all three of those things, but over time, usually we've developed a tendency to do one more than the other. In fact, at the moment, I thought it might be good for you to just take a moment yourselves to think of what do you do in your daily life that builds charge for you, that helps you experience you in a more full way. And what do you do in your daily life that facilitates you expressing that experience out into the world? So I'll just give you, I don't know, 30 seconds or so to give that thought. And even just beginning to contemplate that thought might give you an idea of which of those things you have a bit more of a bent towards, and which you might neglect, and therefore it may require more attention.
People could add their comments into the chat box if they want to, Narelle.
Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah.
So when I contemplate these things, I think, well, what's charging? And I think, well, curling up on a lounge chair and quietly reading is often a charging experience. Meditating, listening to music, walking in nature, and pausing long enough to take in the environment. Sometimes it's just simply connecting with the sort of anxiety that I might be feeling at the thought of doing this presentation. That would be a in-stroke thing, or attending to some other thought that I had and letting that thought sit long enough to build a bit of a charge behind it. When I think of discharging, things come more easily to my mind. Anyway, I think of playing sport, dancing, singing, emotionally expressing what I'm feeling. Cognitively, it would be like debating and arguing and discussing ideas. So when reflecting on this, you may also notice that often there's one activity that could do either. Like when I was just jotting these ideas down earlier today, I thought, well, when I go walking, sometimes I go walking because I want to release energy. And so there's a different kind of walk I engage in. It's a much more energetic walk. And it really almost wouldn't matter where I was walking because my purpose is to sort of discharge. And there are other days when I go walking where I go at a slower pace and I'm taking in the environment around me and letting that environment nurture and nourish me. So in that case, my walking would be a charging process. There's no right way to be, but the patterns we've developed may have limited our capacity for aliveness and vitality, or our sense of purpose in the world, or our ability to experience or express different feelings, or our capacity to fantasize or have ideas and then enact them in the world. So bringing these patterns to awareness gives us much more choice about how we want to live our lives. So in working with pulsation, the long-term goal is to get an easy flow from one stroke to the other. So apart from the overall pulsation of someone that I've just been trying to convey, the Radix practitioner is also curious and wants to develop the client's curiosity about more subtle pulsations, like what's actually happening with the charge and the discharging process in each of the segments. And where is the charge? Is it all up in one part of the body, like in the head, or is it all down in the legs and not much up here in the upper body? Is it more on the periphery, in the muscles and the skin of the body, or is it more in the core? And, you know, in the segments, is there a flow from core to periphery and up and down? And this brings me to the next diagram. So it's not simply a matter of whether you're charging and discharging. There are very subtle ways that you can interrupt the process of charging, and you can interrupt the process of discharging. And we like to sort of demonstrate that with this diagram. You'll see in the middle of the diagram is the word embodiment. And this is really the starting point. Just because people walk around with a physical body, we can't assume that they're actually inhabiting that body. And that was always a surprise to me when I first started doing this work. I always thought, oh, well, if, you know, people are using their body, they're obviously inhabiting their body. But you'd be surprised at the number of athletes or dancers who have come to do work with me who, in fact, are not very much in their body in the way that we talk about it. They don't have much sense of their body. Their bodies are more a machine that they move around. And so one of the first things we do as Radix practitioners is, and we're working with Pulsation, is we check first of all that the person is good enough, if you like, embodied in the room. And George and Brendan may want to talk a bit more about this later, because that in itself could be a webinar. So we're going to assume at this moment that people are embodied. And then if you come down to the bottom blue bit with the little pointy stick, you'll see that opposite it is the word tolerating the small energetic impulses of the body. So one of the first things you've got to do when you're working with a pulsation is you've got to recognize that there's an impulse there. And then you have to experience the body as a container. So if we work around clockwise, coming down to 6 o'clock now, and experiencing the body as a container is another challenging thing for a lot of people. A lot of people don't feel that their body can contain their experience. So they're the people who might come to see you, and they're worried that if they start to express something, that it's just going to blow apart, or it's just going to drift off into the ether somewhere. So one thing sometimes we have to do when working with people is help them experience their bodies as containers. But let's say someone can do that, then they have to sort of trust and let that energy, that impulse, whatever it is, deepen down throughout their body to a point where there's so much charge in their body that they want to actually express it in some way or another. And then the choice is, do they express it in isolation, just with themselves, or do they express it in relationship? And then, of course, having done that, there's a surrendering to the fullness of the moment. There's a sort of relief. An easy way to understand this is to think of something like sad. So let's imagine you're walking past a shop and you hear a piece of music, and it reminds you of something in the past. Could be an old lover or some event that had a lot of sentimental value for you, and you feel a bit sad. That's where you begin to, that's where the tolerating the small energetic impulse of the body starts. Do you allow that sadness to build, knowing that your body can contain it? Do you let it move down through all your segments so that, you know, you might end up having quite a bit of a sob as you recall the situation, which would be going into the emotional expression? Do you rush off to your car and sit in your car and have a cry about it? Do you ring a friend and have a conversation with them and cry with them about it? So there's many different ways that you can deal with that particular situation. And that might be one that's just something in the moment. But you can see that if you constantly ignored or didn't allow one of those steps to happen, then it can become more of a chronic problem that would probably bring you to work with a Radix practitioner. So that's how we do this. I think one of the important things to notice is that in every session we are working with this emerging process, attempting to track these processes and assist, more importantly really, to assist the client to learn to track and identify these processes too. It's important to note that everybody has charge in their body. So when I was talking earlier about, do you tend to be someone who charges more or discharges more? What differentiates people is the location of their charge, the distribution of the charge in their body, the amount of charge that they can tolerate, and the charge and the intensity of the charge that they're happy to express. So, if we go back to this, is all the charge in the head, or is it down in the legs, or is it in the gut? Is it spread evenly throughout the body at a low charge or a high charge? Are there some areas that are more charged than others? There's some of the questions that we'd be asking ourselves as Radix practitioners. For many different reasons, some people have a hard time tolerating any charge in their bodies or even the sensation of their bodies. And George and Brendan may have some examples of this when they discuss. Other clients may not have such a full body resistance to charging, but they may have some areas that can tolerate more or less charge. Or they may, for example, they may keep all the charge in their head and not let it go down into their legs. Others may tolerate charge until it connects with some emotion that for whatever reason they think they shouldn't feel, or some impulse that they think they shouldn't have. The more highly charged someone is, the more easy it is to build a higher charge. Charge moves towards higher charge. And so people like that can often not feel so overwhelmed with charge, but what they do is they block the discharge. And so they can feel a bit fenced in or a bit tense or a bit stressed or highly tense or highly stressed. I think at this point, it's important to say that in restoring this pulsation, in whatever way we do it, Radix work does not always work with calming hypercharged nervous systems. Depending on the client and their history and the emerging process at the time, there will be times when we encourage what in some circles might be considered dysregulation. And I like this quote from Rene Macom in his book, My Grandmother's Hands. Being able to settle into your body is a crucial skill, but settling your body is not the best response in every situation. There will be times when you need to activate your body and act constructively. In fact, when settling is a reflexive response, so that's interesting, isn't it? Reflexive, it's that unconscious thing again. Rather than a mindful one, it can be a form of avoiding or overriding an opportunity to serve or to heal. The keys to healing are staying with your body, discerning what you need to do next, then settling or mobilizing your body based on the situation. And that's how we think about working with that particular issue in Radix. So just to finish up, I thought I might attempt to bring all of this together by just talking briefly about a client I worked with a few years ago. We'll call this man Bob. Bob came to sessions because he was struggling with chronic anxiety, which was interfering with his relationships, especially his intimate relationships. He had experienced early development and interruptions in the sense that when he was just a couple of months old, his parents split up. His mother later remarried. And he spent a lot of his childhood moving around different families. He reports that he had to always be constantly aware of what was going on and adjusting to the different customs and laws, if you like, that each of the families had. There was no time, as I heard this story, I had a sense that there was no time for him to drop deeply into his own experience and feel safe. He was a well-built guy, but he played sport and was very active, but he reported that he had a very little sense of his legs, particularly of his legs being supportive in any way. He worked in the creative arts, and he loved doing that, but he said it was always an effort to create. He had a sense that he was always having to push himself. When he was in a relationship, particularly an intimate relationship, he said he completely lost all sense of himself. So working with him somatically from a Radix perspective, addressing what we're talking about here with pulsation, I noticed that he had little connection with his legs and his feet, and his neck was extremely tight. His breathing was very shallow, particularly the inhale, and he pushed or put a lot of effort into his out-breath. He was very engaging with me. I really liked him a lot, but he had little sense of what he was experiencing when we were sharing. One of the things I haven't mentioned so far is when we're working with pulsation to restore the pulsation, in Radix we think, oh, in this moment is to do this, do I need to work with grounding? Do I need to work with centering? Do I need to work with building physical body boundaries? Do I need to work with containment? Do I need to work with them having better self-contact with themselves? Do I need to work with them coming out and having better contact with other people? So with this guy, I decided we had to focus on two areas. One was building his capacity for self-contact, and the other was working with his grounding. Bringing him into a present reality, which is what grounding is about, but more specifically, bringing the energy that was all up in his head down into his legs and his feet and his hands and his arms and his eyes. So we did this. 6, 7, sorry, I've just lost my page. The grounding work we needed to do was very young because I had a sense that he lost his grounding pretty early. So we did what David Boadella calls horizontal grounding. He would lie on the floor and he initially would just put his feet on my chest and see if he could actually feel the contact of my chest with his feet. Later on, he got into sort of pressing more into my chest on the inhale because I was wanting to build his self-contact. And part of our theory is that if you're wanting to build more self-contact, you work with the in-stroke. Later, we got to working with him reaching with his hands and, more importantly, not only reaching, but really grabbing and holding, letting himself have stuff. Over time, he became more able to relate to others and to hang on to a sense of himself. And he said as a consequence of that, he became a lot less controlling. He had some sessions where he cried very deeply about his experiences as a young child. And finally, he entered a new relationship and he was able to support himself more easily in that relationship. But I think the thing that struck me most importantly about him was he said one of the big changes he noticed was that now he could do his creative work and he wasn't pushing himself. There was no longer a sense that he had to put effort into it. He said it just flowed. So I guess in regard to the pulsation, we located where his pulsation was blocked with his head. We redistributed it down to his legs and his feet. We built up his tolerance for having more charge in his body so that he didn't experience it so much as anxiety. And all of that enabled him to support himself more in his life and his relationships and to express the feelings associated with that. So I think this could be a good point to stop. Hand it over to Brendan and George.
Yeah. Okay. Before we thank you, Narelle, there's a lot there and a lot of terms.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and I think of the charge and segments. A lot of people may not have heard those terms before. And so please, if you've got any questions about those, pop them in the questions section. But have a look at the, this may be a good time before we go to the panel to have a look at the questions again, 6, 7 and 8 in the poll. Regarding pulsation and emotional flow through the body, as Narelle was talking about distribution and blockages, and be good to know if that's familiar or unfamiliar. It's certainly not language that CBT and cognitive behavior therapy talks about. It's a different kind of language that's far more body oriented and physiologically oriented. So if you're unfamiliar with some of those terms, please ask. And then we might invite you, George, to share your reflection as a somatic Radix psychotherapist. What you experienced with that presentation and how it may impact some of the work you do with your clients.
Yeah, well, obviously it's very familiar. It's good hearing it all in another way, presenting it to the general public in simpler words so people can understand. But that the pulsation is so critical. I mean, you have that, like Narelle said, all day long. And for a normal human being to get that homeostasis there, when you feel the happiest is when you've got a nice pulsation. You're going out, you're doing things, expressing energy. Then when you get satisfied with that and you're depleted, you come in and you build it up again and do the things you need to do to recover. And I noticed that in my life as well. There are times I need to sleep more, and other times I have a lot of energy to go out and be with people. And then at some point, I've learned to trust my body. When my body will tell me when that's enough discharge now it's time to go and recoup that and learn from what I just did. And it's just very satisfying. It feels more fulfilling in your life to be able to go in when you need to, come out when you need to, and then notice where it gets blocked. And that's what I'm seeing with clients all the time. They come in when that pulsation is blocked and they just don't feel satisfied in their life. They're not progressing like they'd like to because some part in their body or that segment is blocked from some past trauma or some whatever it is. And it'll normally contain a feeling or an emotion or movement that got blocked, wasn't allowed to be expressed when they were growing up. A lot of this goes back to childhood often, I find. And when you get people to take the risk to do that, because when we get people to do things, it's normally something they don't normally do. So they have to have the courage and risk doing it. And when they do it, then all the energy then flows again, either coming out or going in where they avoid going in. And that relates to eye contact as well. And
yeah, a question's come up with regards to the term blocking. How do you know? I mean, as a therapist, and you've done a lot of personal work, which is I guess part of your training. That's something not everyone would have experienced, and it's probably something specific to the Radix somatic psychotherapists is the fact that you are required to do a lot of personal work. But the average person, what would they experience if the term blocked comes up for them?
Term in the
In
session.
a session, yeah. What might they experience? What might they feel?
Yeah. Well, that's what we're trained to notice. where they're tensing up, holding on, they're not breathing much, or they're not making much eye contact, so they're going in and they're not coming out much in the session, connecting with you. That says a lot. Or often when they say, I'm afraid of, or I'm afraid of doing X, then you can simulate that in the session and get them to do the thing that they're afraid of doing in front of someone else. And that comes with trust, when they can take the risk in a session to actually express something that they normally wouldn't. And that happens often when there's things they'd love to say to somebody, but they can't. And so you simulate it in the session and you watch how their body does that, and whether they curl up and hold back or whisper, they're hardly breathing, or they express it well and can say what they need to say. And then it just flows. And then often they'll be feeling really good after that, especially if it's anger. A lot of people will block anger and they won't speak up. And you get them to simulate that, to get it out. And then you ask them, how was that? And they'll say, oh, I felt great. You wouldn't do it in person, but the body wants to do that. That fight-flight response system in the body has to express itself in some way. And if you can't let it out naturally, that's when people start reacting and creating dramas, and because your body's trying to release it. And it's great working with people to give them a safe space to do that, an outlet to actually allow that expression to come out. And so the pulsation is flowing again, in and out beautifully.
Yeah, it's interesting that notion of safety, isn't it? So if we're talking about a cohort or a group of traumatized clients or people who have learnt not to be embodied, then that trust is not going to come easily.
Yeah. So you find where the limit is, you do a little bit, or you do a lot, and you find where the person's limit is, plus a little more, and you take the risk to express. And because normally they're blocked, either that in-stroke or the outstroke, because of their adaptive behaviours. They had to adapt, they had to bring in to survive, and that becomes the norm. And you want to start softening that problem, which may have saved them at the time when they needed it, when they were younger, but now it becomes a liability when you can't progress further and become more alive in your body. Yeah.
Thanks, George. I want to bring Brendan in because I can see Brendan nodding. And, what are your reflections? You work a lot with disembodied, or people who have, I think Narelle used the term, just trying to find how Narelle expressed the way people just learn for survival. I think you used the term survival, Narelle, a survival way to be in the world, and then you're asking them to go back to a place that may not necessarily have always felt safe.
Yeah, I was reflecting exactly on that for my own process, actually, Louise, because I think it's helpful to think about how we limited pulsation to survive. So, I was taught growing up that emotional expression wasn't acceptable, and that I couldn't trust my feelings and trust my body. And so there was a way in which I limited my expression, and also going in and connecting with my own feelings and needs. I think that I had to do that to survive, and that resulted in a people-pleasing sort of response where I was meeting everybody else's expectations, but I didn't actually know who I was. So restoring pulsation is so, I think, fundamental in being able to learn how to both express and come in and get a sense of self, to know who we are, and to be able to even build a positive or secure sense of self at all. So, bring pulsation.
Are you speaking to what Narelle was speaking in terms of moving from the unconscious to the conscious sense of self?
Yeah, exactly. I think I think that it's not until we work at that deeper unconscious level and become aware of what's happening in our body, as George was describing some of those blocks, being able to work with them to be able to restore pulsation, such as a limited breathing pattern, a locked jaw, going away in the eyes, all of these different things that can happen in each segment of the body, and working with that. And to be able to restore a natural flow of pulsation, I think fundamentally impacts on your sense of self, and, being able to trust, this is what I feel and this is who I am, and I feel centered in that place and that experience, and I'm okay with that, and I'm going to take myself out into the world now and express that. That was a huge learning for me in doing this work personally.
So we're not talking about brief therapy here.
No.
This is not brief 8-session CBT style therapy. That's a process that takes time. Would you say, George?
Yeah.
How would you?
Yep. No, you feel the benefit pretty quickly, I'd say. But if you want the full, depends how far you want to go. How much of the pulsation do you want to clear up? Then it can be a lot. If people have got complex trauma or multiple traumas in their lives, obviously it's going to be a lot more work. But hopefully you're feeling the benefit as you go along, even though you may go through periods where you feel worse because you're releasing it. But if you do it gently and in a grounded way, then you can feel that you're progressing, even though you may not be where you want to be straight away. You can feel that, this is worthwhile. Something's shifting, my body's feeling lighter, I'm feeling better, stronger. And then the next layer comes up in the next session, and work through that. So, you have to give people incentive to know that, you're going to feel some benefits, but you're also going to realize how much is there as you release it. And then you go on as long as you go. And it depends, how much you want to do, how much time you've got to.
So would it be fair to say there's a fair bit of education about the nervous system for clients in terms of pulsation and restoring natural rhythm, if that's a word I use?
I think it's important to mention is that there are some perspectives on somatic work which try to avoid any dysregulation, which means, becoming overwhelmed with feelings or very angry or experiencing intense emotions like fear. And, when we're talking about restoring pulsation, it's not actually possible to always be staying in this window of tolerance where, you're just feeling okay and not overwhelmed too much, because as part of the process, when your body is ready to go there, you will feel the intensity of the emotion that you may not have felt at that time of your life. Say in childhood, there was abuse or trauma from earlier stages in life. The body's still holding those feelings. And so to restore the pulsation, we have to be able to allow ourselves to go into a dysregulated state and express intense emotions at times. But the key thing to be able to understand is that if we're grounded in that expression, then it doesn't have to be re-traumatizing, which I think people are fearful of, or falling apart in some way. If they go there, they won't be able to come back. That's not the case. By working with grounding and understanding how to stay present, your body can still process the intensity of the emotion at the same time.
Yeah, that's a big key, and that's why we have a lot of training and do a lot of our personal work. We have to know the client really has to be grounded before you take that risk and release that level that needs to come out. But you don't want to let it out unless they are, like Brendan said, grounded. I've certainly seen a lot of people who've done a lot of other different expressive therapies that have really just blown them apart, and they come in quite traumatized from it because they weren't really grounded properly beforehand.
So we're not talking expression just for expression's sake.
No.
Yeah. Narelle, I'm wondering what your thoughts are given the panel's reflections.
I had a couple of thoughts. The question about blocks, I thought that was a very good question somebody asked. And my response to that would be, you're blocking when maybe you have a lot of tension in a particular area, or it's very tight.
Alert from updates available.
And
Sorry.
It's not flexible. Another way that you might identify that you're blocking at a body level might be you're just not aware of some part of your body, you know. A bit like that client I was talking about, you know, he had legs, he used his legs, but he wasn't very aware of his legs. So, you know, when you start to think of which parts of your body do you have little awareness of, I think that's a blocking sort of thing. Yeah, I liked what you said, Louise, just now, that, you know, it's not about expressing for expressing's sake. It's sort of like, you know, we are thinking, you know, the reason we might encourage some people to sort of express strongly some action just as much as some emotion or some thought, you know, something they've really been sitting on that they really want to say to someone, is because we've identified and they've identified that that's what's blocking their pulsation. And then they have that sense of peace afterwards, and it can flow more freely.
So
It's
the
great
way
when you hear a client say after they've released something, the relief. You see that relief breath and the space that opens up in their body is that's a good sign that that's all flowing again, the part that was blocked off. Yeah.
So Gio's asked a question: how do you tell the difference between blocking and good old muscle tension? Example from overuse.
Muscle tension from overuse, did you say?
Yeah, and you know, we often hear people say, "Yeah, exercise. I'm going to the gym and I'm muscling up and I'm, you know, building that really rigid muscle structure." How's that different from blocking?
Well, it depends who the people are, I think. You know, sort of like some people build up that sort of muscular look to sort of compensate for a lack of connection with their body, I think. How do you differentiate that? I think that's one of the challenges sometimes in Radix work, is that when a lot of people go to the gym these days, they come in and you sometimes have to work out, is this really healthy muscular tension, or is this sort of like they've just muscled up? And sometimes you don't know until you start working with the person, but I think it starts to come out when you actually get them sort of moving and doing things. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you know, you can have athletes who come into Radix, they're not really in their bodies. You know, I've had people who run marathon races, you know, and they're so disconnected from what we would say is really knowing their bodies and experiencing their bodies. So they might have quite a lot of muscle on their body, but how you differentiate it at the time, I think, I don't know, Brendan and George might know, but I think it's a bit hard to work out sometimes.
Yeah, that often it's, if I go from my experience, if I've overused a muscle, it'll be tight, but if it's an actual block, it'll feel heavy or a weight to it rather than a muscular tightness. That's one way of looking at it. Or it just feels fatigued on the inside, and I haven't, especially if I haven't overused it, but it is fatigued. I can tell something, I've been tensing up and holding something back in that area.
Yeah. And it's also helpful, I think, to talk about the fact that sometimes it's not about tension. Sometimes it's about complete looseness and a lack of awareness of the body periphery at all. So somebody who has experienced a lot of trauma, they might be able to feel their head and nothing below, or they have that energetic awareness of their body from their head down. And so building up even a sense of the periphery of their body, which is the opposite of working with muscular tension, isn't it? It's giving them a sense of their body. So it can be the other extreme as well.
So what changes, Brendan, if somebody's pulsation and awareness increases in contact with themselves? What are they experiencing? Where is that shift or change?
if there is a change in their pulsation.
And their awareness.
Yeah, that's a good question. It can be hard to describe what that actually,
Yeah,
what the
and I'm
experience
relating
is.
it. Yeah, and I'm relating it to a question that's been asked around the term safety's been overused and flogged around, and what does safety mean? And I'm just going to expand that into connection, safety and connection with oneself. So I wonder what that quality of connection is. And again, different for everyone. And it is moving into character styles, and we'll get there in webinar 2.
Well, the first thing I think about is the eyes, and Narelle alluded to this when she talked about when somebody first comes into the therapy room, are they really present with us? Do they feel safe and comfortable to be there? And what's happening in the eyes is a very strong indicator of that. You know, that's the first segment we sort of are aware of. And, you know, I'm sure that you all have examples of people who've struggled to even be able to have any form of eye contact, even be in the room with you, you know, depending on the level of trauma that somebody's experienced. So it varies depending on the person and what they've been through. Just to be in the room and be there and have eye contact and have a sense that someone is with them can be a completely new experience for the person. And you may have to work with that process for a long time before you start going in any deeper.
It's also reflected, I think, with the breath. Like when Brendan was just talking, then I was thinking of a new client I had, and in my room I have 3 chairs, you know, and I don't have a special chair. So one of the first things I ask people is, where do you want to sit? And she sort of sat, what did she do? I think she sat opposite me. And I looked, and it was a bit her eyes were a bit spaced out, but there was no, well, obviously she was breathing, but you almost couldn't see any breath happening. And so I thought, oh, I don't think she's quite here. You know, I don't think she's quite present. So I said, how about you sit in another chair and just experience what it might be like sitting in this other chair? So she moved over to a chair where she was now looking out the window. She wasn't looking directly at me. And as soon as she sat in the chair, she went, oh, yeah. And you had to say, oh, she's arrived, you know. And I said something like that to her. I said, oh, so you've arrived? And she said, yes, you know. So you felt you could start. And so I think we're trained to sort of observe and notice those. They're often quite subtle things, but you know, and then play with them in the way that I hinted at, I think, when I talked about embodiment, to sort of see, how can this person be in the room with me? And I guess we look for things like, you know, is there a bit of an easy breath? And as Brendan said, you know, is there a sense of somebody's home in their eyes, you know?
So when you say someone being in the room with me, then I start to think the quality of you as a therapist being with the person is just as important as the person who's there to be with you.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And that co-regulation of the pulsation.
Yeah. One of the things that we have to do in our Radix training as a practitioner is a lot of our own personal work to enable us to be present with the other person. And that is a critical fundamental part of what's going on unconsciously, is what the therapist is creating in terms of a safe therapeutic space for the client to be able to be present with their stuff. So,
how do you do that, Brendan? How might that look in a typical session with, and not only with traumatized clients, but clients who enter a room? What's the meeting point? Because it's clearly not just cognitive, is it?
no. Yeah, it depends on the situation. Maybe George can respond to that one.
Oh, yeah, definitely on that one. So I always leave a nice big gap between clients so I can check in with myself. Am I in my body right now? And I won't let the client in if they're in the waiting area until feel like I'm now connected to my body. And it's the pulsation. Do I have to meditate for 5 minutes to come back in, or do I need to grab my rebound and jump on it and discharge to feel like, oh, now I'm out and ready, and then I'll let the client in and begin working. But I have to be feeling my body when I'm connecting with the client, which means often I can feel what they're feeling. And occasionally I'll start falling asleep and I think, well, why am I falling asleep? And then because they're just chatting in their head, and you're trying to find a point to stop it, to get it deeper, to progress it. So my body's telling me, if you're in your body, then your body's telling you what's going on for the client as well, rather than just looking at it, which is part of it. But you can also feel the impact on your own self. And for that, you've got to be in your body. So I'll either be meditating or I'll be jumping up and down on the rebound.
So you're using your body as a resource. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So Narelle, if you were to get participants to check in right now with themselves, what would they be doing to check where they're at now? Maybe even making a comparison between the start of this session and now having listened. What could they do?
A very simple thing would just be to notice how they're sitting, what part of their bodies are they aware of as they're sitting in the chairs listening to us, what's happening with their breath, are they breathing in more, are they breathing out more? Doesn't matter, but is it pretty even? Is it balanced between their chest and their belly, or their belly and their chest? How awake are they? Are they going to sleep with all this talk, or are they engaged? What's telling them that they're engaged? I often say, people say something, I'm feeling this, and I'll go, well, what's telling you this in your body? What are they feeling? Is there sort of more sort of tingling or excitement in their body, is in some parts of their body, or so.
Yeah, because in some ways, Anonymous has raised the issue of armoring, and that Wilhelm Reich, I think I got Anonymous right. Let me make sure. No, I'm sorry. It was Suzanne said Wilhelm Reich, the father of Reichian work, talked about armoring. So there's no right or wrong there, is there? If the body becomes a resource, it's simply information.
I think the thing about armoring too is that one of the things that became really clear back in the 1990s, maybe late 80s, was that Wilhelm Reich talked a lot about armoring, which is sort of chronic tension that builds up in your body. But as Brendan alluded to earlier, there are some people who, through life circumstances, and trauma is the obvious one, but there's other circumstances as well, don't have that sense of armor in the way that Reich's talking about. All their charge, as I said earlier in the session, all their charge is in their core. Armor, as Reich talked about it, you could say they're armored in their core, I guess, because they're overcharged there. And armor really refers to sort of an overcharge in the body that isn't moving. And with those people who don't have armor, we in fact have to work to help them develop, for want of a better word, not so much armor, but at least a sense of their body, the sense of their body as a container, a sense that they can have charge. So the way you work with those people is really different from how you might work with somebody who you see as armored, in the sense that all the charge is on the periphery and it's overcharged. Does that make sense?
That speaks to Menika's comment here that there there may be a need to take care of the cultural behaviours of people from some countries where looking in the eye is considered disrespectful. A lot of Indigenous cultures, you know, have a hierarchical concerns around that. So how, I mean, you would never make someone, force someone to look at you. I mean, you'd never use force at all.
No.
But something you had that hasn't been touched on tonight is touch and pulsation and the use of touch in Radix work. And I wonder if someone could speak to that.
Well, I think I addressed it a little bit in the sense that people think of touch as sort of holding hands or stroking or something. In Radix, we think of physical contact rather than touch. So in the case example that I gave with Bob, you know, I had him put his feet on my, like we negotiate, you obviously negotiate these things first, but he had his feet on my chest. So that was that for me, that's physical contact. And we worked with that a lot. And we worked with that when he was working with sort of grabbing my arm and reaching for my arm. And there's touch and physical contact in that way too, but it's not just stroking or holding.
No. So specifically therapeutic touch is what trained therapeutic touch, which is very powerful. Yeah.
And if there's been an attachment injury as a child and there hasn't been a lot of soothing or physical contact from their caregivers or parents, then you know, touch and physical contact in a negotiated way, as Narelle said, can be a powerful way to transform that and to get a sense of healing of the attachment wound. You know, something as simple as, you know, holding out your arm and letting the client reach for that can bring up so much pain, you know. So it's very powerful in terms of healing some of those early childhood wounds as well. And I think that talk therapy wouldn't be able to necessarily target at that level.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot going on between therapist and client. Yeah, at a felt sense. Yeah.
Well,
it's
holding somebody's head, you know, it's amazing how if you just hold somebody's head, if they're overthinking or something, and have them just lower it, I mean, that's physical touch, isn't it? And, you know, they just feel the relief of that, you know, someone is, if you like, taking over their head would be another example.
Okay, well, this is the last opportunity for questions, I think. I'm just going to, how would you take into account cultural differences in understanding what's normal for clients? Well, you know, I think we're not the experts in the room. I think that would be fair to say. Would you agree? It's a big shift from therapist as expert to client who needs to be told how to fix themselves. Yeah.
You negotiate with that person and you learn from them and you ask them, you know, what their perspective on those things are and, you know, what is culturally appropriate to them, and you work with that.
And you try different things, and if it doesn't work, and quickly stop that, do something else. You can't get it right.
With what presents in the room. Rather than a script or an agenda before the client arrives. And we'll have got time for one more question, which has come from Pana. Who created the name Pulsation?
Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, we're a pulsatory organism, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm sure medicine probably has got pulsation in there all the time, you know, so.
I spend ages talking about us being a pulsatory organism, from our heart to our lungs to our bowel to our, you know, we pulsate when we sob, we pulsate when we orgasm. There's so much pulsation as an organism, and yeah, I find it descriptive, but it's not an everyday term, really. Okay, well, we've got some time here. I'd really like it if everyone went to the last of the poll questions about application and interest. That would help us inform the following webinars. There has been a comment about the content being a lot. Yes, it has been a lot, and I hope it's been really valuable for everyone. There's been a lot of familiarity, but a lot of seeking more information, which is really helpful. And Brendan, I sort of nominated you to speak to a slide about where to from here, and where can people get more information if they need to.
Oh yes, the slides have gone off. Oh, they're coming back. Great.
Miraculously.
Yes, if people would like to follow up with any inquiries about Radix work or questions about the webinar or further training, you're able to go to our website, radixaustralia.com.au, and we put everything up there. There's educational resources, there are practitioner contact details in your local area. We advertise training workshops and residential workshops there. So that's your main port of call to go to our website. And we also encourage you to follow us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, which is Radix Somatic Psychotherapy Australia. And we are going to be posting a lot of social media content there as well. And we will be posting this webinar to YouTube once it's completed, and this webinar will be accessible there on YouTube as well.
Yeah, big shout out, thank you to our co-hosts, IT Genius, Peter Moriarty and Gypsy. Thank you so much. Technical assistance has been greatly appreciated. I think we will probably wrap up there, and I thank you, Narelle, for being our keynote. I know it is a massive, massive topic, pulsation as a core concept, and something that you know, it's about our aliveness and our life, and there's some references there. Please make good use of them for follow-up. There's a book there by Charles Kelly as well, Creative Process in Man and in Nature. And thank you to all our participants. I apologise if we didn't get to answer absolutely every question. Please continue to contact us, and we will incorporate them into the following webinars.
Thank you, Louise, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Louise.
Pleasure. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Goodbye.